Welcome to episode 4 of the Ether PDF read-through. In this video, we're going over the general rules chapter, so we're really getting into the meat of the game. So before we get into this, I want to emphasize the fact that attribute rolls are the only rolls that happen during gameplay. You roll to create your character, but after that, the only type of roll that you're doing for the rest of the game is attribute rolls, and they all work the same way. You roll for spellcasting, you roll during combat, but they all work the same way fundamentally. So that being said, we'll talk about what the attributes are. They're pretty much the traditional attributes besides wit and luck. So we have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wit, and luck. Wit is a combination of wisdom and charisma in terms of like 5e and traditional role-playing games. And then luck is just kind of this wild card attribute where if nothing else makes sense, roll with luck, and then I'll kind of go over that in a bit. And I'm just going to speed through these because most of you know what these stand for, but strength is like your raw physicality, dexterity is like your agility, reflexes, overall movement control. Constitution is your body's like immune system, essentially. It's adaptability, its ability to kind of handle things on its own. It's your overall health. It's the things that your body does that you can't consciously control. Or strength is like I'm consciously moving my hands, I'm consciously punching, I'm not consciously healing my wounds and that kind of thing. Intelligence is your level of education, memory, and overall kind of knowledge on like facts and written history, theories, theology, math, all that kind of stuff. Wit is your your social skills, your intuition. It's kind of like where strength is like conscious and constitution is like unconscious. Intelligence is like your conscious ability to use your mind, and wit is like your sort of natural, intuitive, unconscious ability to use your mind. Problem solving, overall mental stability, your perception. It's like that kind of realm of the brain. And then luck is, like I said, just kind of the wild card. And like I said too, we'll get into that. So to break down the attribute roll, which is the only roll that you're going to be doing in the game. So they determine what happens next. The GM will call for an attribute roll whenever a player's character does something risky. Attribute rolls always propel the narrative forward with 3 possible outcomes: success, partial success, or failure. And successes always advance the story favorably for the players. Partial success does that with some drawbacks. And then a failure, of course, leads to negative outcomes. So again, success, you do it. Partial, you do it, but a consequence. And then a failure is you don't do it, and there is a consequence. Okay, so going into how they work, I'd like to say that this is probably the thing that I'm most proud of, that is the most simple. And I'm not going to say that I invented it, but I think the way that I'm using this is like really fun. I just want to say that because I think it's important going into this to know like how kind of key it is for the game. So to determine which outcome you receive, attribute rolls use a simple yet effective concept called the grace law, which is what I'm calling it, which states if you can only meet or beat the target number by adding your attribute bonus, your roll is a partial success. And then I have it illustrated here, or Rachel has illustrated it for me very elegantly here. So we have an example of a character with a strength of 4, and the target number is strength 15. So the GM in the game, the character decides to do something that requires strength, and the GM says, okay, that's going to be a strength 15. Okay, I'll get into where the GM gets that number later. It's really easy, but okay, strength 15. I have a strength of 4, so whatever I roll, I'm adding 4 to that. So looking at these diagrams, we see if I roll 7, I add my 4 to it, brings it to 11. It's not even close to 15, that's a failure. But let's say I roll a 12. I add my 4 to it. That brings it to a 16. So the original 12 didn't get me there, but my bonus did. So that's a partial. And then what's a success? Let's say I roll an 18 off the bat. Boom. That's a success. Like, another way to think about it is immediately you're looking at the number on the die itself to tell you whether or not it's a success. With the target being 15 and let's say I roll a 5. Well, that's automatically, we know it's not a success. We don't know what my bonus is yet because I haven't applied it yet. But we do know in this example that it's 4, so then that would be a 9, which doesn't get me there. So it's important to point out too that as your character levels up, at each level they get certain. I'll go over leveling later, but they get a certain amount of points that they can add to their attributes. So as a character levels up, their bonuses get higher, but because of the grace law, their likelihood of getting a success never changes. The only thing affected is the likelihood of getting a partial success, which I think isn't for everyone, but I love it, and I think it kind of, in a way, simulates reality a bit. As you get better at a certain skill, or as you sort of hone, a certain quality about you, you're more likely to do the thing good enough than you are to do it perfectly every time. And there is a gradient to the intensity of the consequence. So of course, if you roll a 1, that is a critical failure. The worst thing happens, worst case scenario. In this example, I roll a 7. That's pretty bad. It's like, it could be much worse, but it's pretty bad. This is getting into like the GM world, so this is something I'll expand upon in the GM chapter video. But just so you know, behind the scenes there is this kind of gradient. There's such thing as a low failure and a high failure and a low partial and a high partial, but that's as complicated as it gets, really. And this is how the whole game functions: spellcasting, combat. So this is another sort of overview that I have written out here as an example of how an attribute roll works. And then we have stamina. So your energy for dodging and absorbing hits. So when you're attacked, you will mark your stamina points before marking HP. So for example, if you have 2 stamina and you're facing 3 incoming hits, you're going to mark your 2 stamina, and that's all you have for stamina, and then you're going to mark the leftover in HP. So now your stamina is depleted, as you've marked your maximum amount of hits in that, and any further attacks will directly affect your HP. And let's say you have HP of, 4, so you can take 3 more, Some special attacks may ignore stamina and directly affect your HP. The GM will inform you of such attacks as they happen. So this is stuff like some kind of magic thing that just like it, some monsters might have magical attacks that bypass your stamina and directly affect your HP. Or maybe you get seriously hurt and it just makes sense to just bypass the stamina because the stamina wouldn't apply. And I also say here that a short rest restores your stamina to max, but I'll go over a short rest later as well. HP. The injuries, fatigue, and armor damage that you accumulate from taking hits. So that's sort of the flavor for that. So it's like stamina is your buffer, and then HP is your real health. Stamina replenishes after every short rest. HP doesn't, okay? Upon reaching the maximum number of HP, your character is downed, which I'll get to later. A long rest will restore all HP. And HP can also be restored with ether, which we'll get to later as well. So that's the important thing here. Your stamina comes back after every short rest. Your HP doesn't. So that's the resource that you're trying to make sure doesn't deplete, because you can't take a short rest to recover it. Mana, your mental capacity for casting spells. So I'll go over mana in the spellcasting chapter, but essentially it tallies the same way. And the particular thing about mana is that a short rest will replenish only a number of mana equal to your intelligence or wit, whichever's higher. So that's the compromise I found with replenishing mana, so that you're not having to wait to get another long rest to get it all back. But you're also not getting it all back every time you do a short rest. You get a portion of it back with every short rest. And then, of course, it can also be recovered with ether that you spend, which we'll get to later. Being downed, you won't stay up forever. Once you are downed, you must choose whether to mark a burden or wait for an ally to revive you. If you choose to wait, you lose your chance to mark a burden. A downed character is actively dying and will permanently die if 3 failures are rolled at the table before being revived. These 3 failures will come from other players continuing play while you are downed. So you lose all your HP, you're downed. And it's in that moment you choose whether you think it's safe enough to wait for an ally to revive you, thus not having to mark a burden. But once you choose to wait, you lose your chance to mark a burden. You know, you can't wait for the 2 failures to be rolled and then be like, okay, well, now I'm going to mark a burden. That is a decision that's made as soon as you're downed. And then, of course, I have an example here, but basically it's not death rolls or whatever they're called in 5e. They're just game continues after you're downed, and no matter what the rolls are, if they're failures, they count towards your official death. Partials don't count towards it, it's only failures. So revival. An ally can revive a downed player with a successful roll, situational ruling determined by GM, which restores 1 HP to the downed character. It brings them back into play. And then I have a partial success on a revival will result in the downed player being stabilized but not yet conscious. A failure on a revival does count towards the 3 death failures. So like the act of trying to revive the person, if you fail on that does count towards the death failures as well. But yeah, situational ruling. So depends on what it is. You know, if they're bleeding out, you know, the player is rolling to stop the bleeding, and then therefore they're using a different attribute. They're using a specific attribute for that. If the player is poisoned, then they're using a different attribute for that. They're using a different action. They're describing it in a different way. But yeah, if you get downed, and you know that the combat is in the party's favor, then it's like, might as well be down and then just wait for them to revive me, because it's likely that they'll be able to before 3 failures are rolled. But if you are in a tough fight, or you're on your own, you know, you're split from the party, you're definitely going to mark your burden, unless you want your character to die, which is like a very valid like narrative decision, to get to a point where you're like, well, you know what, my character has had a good run and it's time for them to this makes sense, you know, and it's a cool moment for them to die. If you don't wait, if you don't kill your character, you mark your burden. Your burden grows more gruesome every time you rely on it to stay alive. So marking a burden immediately restores all HP and depletes all held ether. So that's kind of the price you pay, is you deplete all your held ether. Whatever you had in there, you know, if it was full, it's all gone. If you only had 1, it's all gone. If you had nothing, you don't even worry about it. You can still mark a burden if you don't have any held ether. You mark a burden on the burden meter on the character sheet, and these cannot be healed in any way. There's no way to erase those. Those are permanent. And if you accumulate 6, if you get to full, the next time you're downed, you're immediately dead, with no chance of revival, no chance to mark another burden. If you're at 6 and you get downed again, you're gone. Gaining ether. Ether clings to mysterious and dangerous things. You will gain ether through exploring. Every time you discover an important clue, solve a puzzle, overcome a dangerous obstacle, etc. You will also gain 1 ether when you roll a 1 or a 20, but only once per session. So this is a very meta rule. It's just another way of kind of getting ether on the character sheet. And it's another kind of a reward, a fun little thing to attach to rolling a 1 or a 20. But you can't do it again for that session. All right, let's break down held ether. You may hoard your ether to level up, or spend it to save yourself. So when you gain ether, you mark it on your character sheet. You can hold a maximum of 6 at a time, and they will permanently transfer to your level tracker during a long rest. So you want to get ether to do that. you're trying to level up. You're trying to get to your character's end, your big epic battle against your burden. So you're trying to do that, trying to transfer it over. But if you really need to, you can spend it to restore HP and recover mana. 1 ether for 3 HP. 1 ether for 3 mana. If you really need it, and you have held ether, if you really need health, if you really need to cast a spell, that's an option. Ether acts as an experience points mechanic, but they're very functional within the game too, because you do use them to level up, but then you can also spend them, and there's a chance to lose them if you mark a burden. So they're not just experience points. They kind of play into the game a little bit. But in the same way that you like in other tabletop games and in video games, when you beat the monster, you get the point. If it's a bigger monster, you get maybe a little more ether. If it's a little guy, you get 1 ether. Or if you solve a puzzle, you get a little ether. And the GM is the one. It's up to their discretion to determine when those particular conflicts are deserving of an ether. Short rest. So half an hour to catch your breath and clear your head. So during a short rest, characters will recover all stamina, recover mana, remember an amount equal to your intelligence or wit, whichever is higher. Short rests are possible in the voids, but only in secure locations away from immediate danger. If you're in a room full of monsters, you can't take a short rest there. But if you go into the next room and bar the door, as a GM, I would count that as being a place where you can take a short rest. Short rests, what they don't do is they do not restore any HP. Characters can only short rest 3 times per long rest. And then you mark that on your character sheet. Okay, long rests. This is plenty of time to tend to your wounds, repair your armor, and get a full night's sleep. So after a long rest, characters will restore all HP, stamina, mana, skills, and short rests. And then also during a long rest, you transfer your held ether to your level tracker. So all the held ether goes to the level tracker. There's deer out here. Long rests are only possible in a safe settlement or a secure campsite. Typically, in the spirit of the game, you just wait till you get back to your hold, to take the long rest. But there may be places like the town where the void that you went to is in. Maybe you're able to crash there, because it's also in the spirit of the game to be in the void and be like, oh my god, I'm in way too deep. Let me leave, rest, and then come back. So you can go back to the village, that is closest and crash there and spend however many gold the GM decides it costs to take that long rest there. And then with campsites, if you really need a long rest and you're out in the middle of nowhere, you can set up camp. But the only thing with that is that one person keeps watch, and that person only receives the benefit of a short rest. So you just look at everyone and be like, okay, who has the most health? All right, you're taking watch. And then long rests are not possible in the voids. Just can't happen. Because it's the chaotic nature of the voids, of course. And ether, if you let your guard down for too long, you're going to get attacked or mutated or whatever, or the void is going to transform and you're going to be in a completely different place. So it's just not a thing that happens in the voids, unless there's like this crazy narrative moment where maybe someone gets trapped in the voids, and then I'll give them a chance to take a long rest. But yeah, no long rest in the voids. Advantage and disadvantage. Most of you all will know how this works. In situations where you clearly have the upper hand, the GM will have you roll with advantage, which means you roll twice and you take the higher result. And you will automatically roll with advantage when you use skills. Disadvantage in situations when you're weakened or in a bad spot, or whatever it is, where you don't have an advantage, the GM will have you roll with disadvantage, which means you roll twice and you take the lower result. Skills. So you will acquire special talents as you adventure. And I've already kind of gone over this too. But skills grant advantage when rolling in situations relevant to the chosen skill. And then upon leveling up, you select a new skill from the skill list based on in-game events that shaped your character. So every time you choose a skill, you kind of have to sell it to the GM why that particular skill. And it's fun to do that. It's fun to be like, well, during this adventure, we did, X, Y, and Z. So that means that this skill is probably what I would have, acquired based on those events. And again, skills can only be used 3 times per long rest and cannot be restored in any other way. Okay, so that was episode 4. We went over the general rules to Aether, the general rules chapter. If you want to download Aether and have a copy of the PDF for yourself, check it out on itch. I'll put the link in the description. And also check out, if you want to see Aether in action, you want to watch actual play, we have a showcase series on the channel as well. And then again, if you have any questions about the rules, please email me or leave a comment on this page, the itch page, or on the video itself, on this YouTube video. What's the email? The email is etherttrpg@gmail.com. And one final note is that this video is the last recording session at this location where I'm doing it. And so I'm probably gonna, after I finish this video, I'll eventually get to editing them, and then I'll publish them as a batch. So we'll have 1 through 4. And then I'm sorry to have to make you wait for the combat episode, because combat is the best part of tabletop games. When you open up a PDF or a fresh book, you immediately go to combat. I don't know about you, but that's what I do. So I'm sorry to have to wait to do that. I've just run out of energy, but I want to do that, and I will do it soon whenever I get a chance to. I will record those. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'm going to say bye.